it just goes directly there.
Okay, I'll have a quick look. You know what? Maybe you can wave. Maybe you can wave Ken over.
Okay.
So that I'm not holding up the whole lesson.
Oh, okay.
We'll try to help you, but I'd like to carry on. So we're going to resume with our delete. Our delete musician shouldn't be too complicated. So on this page, we'll open up some PHP tags. And maybe we'll write out the steps as comments before we write any of the code. So in order to load this page, right, we're going to click on a delete link and we'll click OK. It's going to load this page and also pass in a parameter called musician ID with some number attached to it. So what are all the things we want to do on this page in order that we can delete this record from the database? We need about 5 or 6 steps to make our delete page functional. We can load it, doesn't do anything. Okay, so we'll definitely need to connect. Yep. What else do we need to do? Okay, yeah. What else? Yep, and 2 more things, 2 or 3 more things. So this will actually delete. What should we do after we delete the record in the database? Yep. And then we want to take the user back to the updated list. We need to do one thing before any of this. It has to do with that ID in our URL. So what do we want to do? Yeah, we want to take the ID. We're not actually using post in this case. When the values are put into the URL, what method are we using instead? Yeah, so we're going to read the selected musician ID from the value at the end of the URL. Because we're going to need that value in order to know which record we're deleting. We don't want to delete everything. No, post is only used when we're submitting a form. There's no form submission. It's just a link. There's one page calling another one with an anchor tag. So we'll create a variable. And instead of using post, as Walt suggested, we're going to use get. And we want to read the value called musician ID. And it is case sensitive. So if our link has musician ID in camel case, we need to use camel case in our get. Hung, do you have a question? Okay. Our database connection is the same as always. So in our SQL delete command, we're going to set up one parameter, because in order to run a delete, we need a where clause. And in that where clause, we have to pass in the ID number of the record we clicked on in the browser. We don't want to delete everything. We only want to delete one record from the table. We'll create our command as we usually do. And then we want to fill the ID. And it's going to be an integer parameter. So we'll set up our delete. We'll pass in the ID from the URL. And when we call execute, that one record should get removed from MySQL. It should be gone. And then we can just move. We'll leave this part. We'll come back to it. We don't want to redirect away from this page until we're sure that our code's actually working. We want to make sure it works first and our record is gone, and then we can add in our redirect. So let's try this out. See how it goes. So now if I go back to my list, click on delete, and say OK, I'm hoping this record called validation test is going to disappear. Okay, problem with my, I think with my password is wrong. So I get a message saying access denied, which means my username or password is probably wrong. I've updated my password, I'll try it again. So my error goes away, but we don't actually know if the delete worked or not. So if I click back and now refresh my list, this record at the bottom is now gone. Now I don't want to have to refresh manually. If the delete works, I want to just automatically come back to this page as soon as we're done deleting. So this is like a hidden page. There's actually no HTML. We don't need to show the user anything here. Just try and delete, and if it works, take them back where they came from. So to redirect, I use the header method, and I set the location to the URL I want to load. So this will redirect and load musicians.php after we're done deleting. I didn't want to add this code right away because I wanted to make sure the delete worked. If we redirect and delete throws an error, we'll never see the error because it's going to leave. So we should always add our redirect once we're confident our code is working. So I'll try one more time. So for example, I have Pearl Jam in here twice. They're not a solo, so this one's accurate, this one isn't. So I'm going to delete them from here. And now my page just appears to kind of flicker and come back. So I'll delete all of these kind of extra records I have. So now I'm down to about 4 records. So here's all the code we need on our delete page. If you were going to delete anything else from any other table, we'd only have to make a few small changes here. We just need to change the variable name, change the table we wanted to delete from, and the variable name, everything else, and then just change the name of the page we want to reload when we're done. Everything else would be the same. So 80% of this code we could reuse to delete something else from a different table. So we talked at the beginning of the course that we wanted to build web applications that could create data, read it, update it, and delete it. So we've now done 3 of the 4. We use our form to create new records. We use our table page to read the data from the database. Now we can delete. So the last thing we need is the ability to modify it. Right now I can add and delete, but I have no way to edit something that's already in the database. And we should be able to do that as well. We won't need to create any new pages for this. We can use the pages we already have for editing. Does anybody have any questions about the things we're doing on the delete page, why we're doing them, or how they work? Most of what's here are things we've already done. The only things we haven't done, we haven't used get before to read a value from the URL, and we haven't executed a delete command before. Everything else on this page we've already done. Yes.
I should remember that last part, the location musicians PHP is, but I don't. If you were to work with that with a larger directory, how would you do that?
Well, you still have to provide it the name of a file. What page do you want to take the user to when all this is done?
So if that was nested in more folders, would it be as simple as I think it is? Or?
Yeah, you would just put the folder name. So right now, that's a good question. So this file is inside the same folder.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we wanted it to go into a folder called, I don't know, we had an admin folder and we wanted to take the user into another folder first. And the file, you just put the path.
Okay, so it's as simple as
Yeah.
So if you're working with HD docs, it's just sort of like, yeah, sorry.
It would be if you had a subfolder inside of HD docs, you would just include that in the path.
Thank you, Rich.
So the last thing we want to do is add the ability to edit. So we want to make changes on this page. What we want to do is let the user click on any musician. And when they do, we want to take them here, but we don't want to give them a blank page. What should we show the user instead if they want to edit? Yeah, we want to populate the form with all the existing values so the user could then change one or more of the values. So there's a couple ways we could do it. How could we let the user select one of these musicians and then take them off to the form, but the form would be populated? If we wanted to make changes here, what could we do? Well, Okay, well, not another row, but yeah, we could add another column. We could put a delete link over here. Yep. How else could we do it? Yep, we could add an edit link. Yeah, or we could just make the names of the musicians clickable. So when you click it, it automatically will take you to the form, and that form will be populated. That will save us a little bit of screen real estate, so we want to turn these into links on the musicians page. So this first column, the name column, we want to wrap this inside of an HTML anchor tag. So those names, rather than being static text like this, they become clickable links. So in here, we're going to link to musiciandetails.php. And just like with our delete link, we need to include the ID. So when the form loads, we know which musician we're supposed to populate into our form. And we'll close the link at the end. So we're wrapping the name into a link. So the user can click on the name. We don't need this click event handler. That's only for delete. We would really annoy our users if they click the name of a musician. We say, are you sure you want to edit this? And it should always be our goal not to annoy our users. So if I refresh the page now, so now when I click my first band, it loads our form and passes in our ID. I click my second one, loads the form, passes in a separate ID. No, the primary key values can never be reused. So if you delete ID 5, that ID is gone forever. There will never be another record with that ID. It's a good question. Yeah, they will not necessarily be sequential. They'll be in ascending order, but there may be gaps. Right, that's right. So now we're going to need to add some code on this page. What will we need to do so that when I click on this band name, this musician name, rather than getting a blank form, how are we going to populate it? I think there's 3 things we need to do when this page loads. Okay, so yes, that's the last thing. That's the third step, is we'll want to print each of these values into the appropriate form input. So that'll be the last thing. We're going to need to do 2 things first in order so that we can do that. So we've passed in the ID. So what are we going to need to do with that ID? Right, we're going to have to take this like we did in delete, take it and store it in a variable. Then we're going to have to connect to the database and go and query this musician record so that we get the name, all the fields, and then we want to print the values into each of the inputs. So when we're editing, the user doesn't get a blank form. They see all of the existing values. and they can change whatever they want to change. So we're going to need to open up this file in our code editor so we can add that logic. So we already created musician details, but right now this page is just blank every time. We want to modify it so it isn't necessarily blue. So above our form, we're going to check, do we have an ID in the URL? If we do, that means the user wants to edit, so we need to go and fetch the information about the musician they clicked on. We're going to initialize some variables. We're going to check if there's a musician ID in the URL string. If there is a musician ID, we want to query the database for the details on this record so we can populate the form. If there's no ID, we don't have to do anything. That means they want to add a new musician, so we can just give the user a blank page. But if there is an ID, we need to populate the page. I'm going to create a variable for each one of our columns. So we're going to use the empty function to tell us, is there a musician ID in the URL? When we're editing, we'll have an ID. When we're adding, we'll have no ID because we're going to create a new record. And then we're going to move this step inside. Our usual connection. So in this case, we're only selecting one record from the database. We might have 8,000 musicians. We'd only care about one of them. 700, 7,999, we're not interested in, so we don't want to select those. We just want the band the user clicked on. So we're going to have a where clause. If these commands are starting to get tedious, good. That means you're executing them a lot. And we'll fill the ID the same way we did on delete. Exactly the same. Now, when we've been using queries so far, we've been calling the method fetch all. Fetch all will return a list of records. In this case, we don't need a list of records. How many records are we looking for? Just one. So we don't need to use fetch all. We can use a different method that will be a little more efficient. That isn't going to require us to use a loop to check the results because we're not going to have a list. So we'll call execute. And instead of calling fetch all, we'll just call the fetch method instead. So we can still use fetch all, but we don't need to. Fetch will be faster. Fetch says we're only selecting one record. We're not selecting a whole list. And then we want to take these 5 variables and populate them from the musician record we got back from the database. So the easy way to copy those. So we're going to put each value into a separate variable. So we're only doing this when we have an ID because the users clicked on some artist name. If they come here because they said, I want to add a new artist, none of this code will run because we don't care. So I'm going to try this out and just see if we get an error. Right now, we won't see anything change in our browser. We'll only see something change if we've broken something. I'm just going to refresh. Okay. Sorry, I'm just checking my password because I can never remember it. Oh, wrong username. Okay, so it's working, but my page is still blank. So we'll have all the values. How would we print the musician name into the musician input? Let's just start there. So we would add something into this line. Right, we can set the value equals, and now we can print so this should populate the first box in our form. We add this attribute. So it takes our query result and populates the first row. So we want to do the same thing for our other text boxes. We've got record label, ranking, and photo. Solo's a bit different. So we want to set the values here as well. So if we print those in the text boxes, we'll come back to solo in a minute. Solo is a little different because it's a checkbox. It doesn't have a value property. So now, I click, it writes record label ranking. Oh, and I left out city. So up at the top, I forgot to include city entirely. So we'll initialize it to null and populate it if we have a city. And then we'll write the city value into the city input. So in my city box, we want to echo out the city variable. We also have to deal with this. Now, I don't have any bands that say they're solo, so maybe I should create one. So I'll say solo here. I can add a new one. But now when I go to edit, we need, my checkbox isn't checked, so we need some logic around this. So what property do we need to set on our checkbox if the musician is a solo artist? Right, there's an attribute here called checked. So we need some logic that we either add checked or we don't, depending on is the artist a solo artist or not. So here's how we can do this. We'll set checked. We'll just set it equal to, I think we can set it to null. And then we can write some logic here that says if solo is true, we'll change our variable to actually say the word checked. If the user is not a solo artist, this will be false, and checked will just be null. So now in here, we can just print out checked or null. Whichever it is. We don't have to say checked equals true or checked equals false. Either says checked or that word's not there at all. So now my box is checked for this musician. For any of the others, it's empty. So we're not setting a value, we're not setting true or false. We're just adding the attribute checked or nothing. So when we look here and view the source, it just says checked in this case. When I view a different artist and view the source, there's just nothing here. There's one more thing we need to include here. I'll explain why. We're going to add one more input. This is going to be hidden. So we don't want users to see it or change it. We're going to use type equals hidden, but we need to call it musician ID. And we want to print the ID number in here. So the users won't see the ID, but we need to include the ID in our form. And I'll show you why when we do our saving. If we don't include this, we will never be able to do an update. It's every time we hit save, it's just going to add a new musician to the database. We don't want to add this record again. We want to modify the existing record. We don't want it to have a duplicate. We'll run it with here, and I'll take this out later so you can see why we need it. So this page is complete now. I know it's a lot of work. It could, but the edit will never run with, we'll never be able to do an update if we don't include the ID. We could check for duplicates to prevent it, but if we want to change something, that change won't get saved. So there's our form. It's finished. So let's say I go in here now. I want to update this. So I'm going to change the city and the ranking from 50 in Barrie to 49 in Toronto. What's going to happen when we try to save this? What should happen here? It says saved. And let's go back and we can refresh. And my save kind of worked. What's the problem? Right, so this was my original record. Another band, ranking 50 Barrie, and now I have another band. So it saved, but what kind of save did it execute? Yeah, it did another insert. Why did it insert another record? Let's have a look at our save page. So why do I now have this musician in there twice? Camilo? Right, well, that's what we want to do. But right now, the code on this page does what kind of command in the database? Right, it will always do an insert every time. So we need to now add some logic on here to do exactly what you're suggesting, Camille. Before we save to the database, we need to check, do we have an ID, yes or no? If we have no ID, we want to add a new musician, so we want to insert. What should we do instead if we have an ID already? Yeah, we want to run an update command. So we need to add that other command in here, and then we need a decision when we have an ID insert. Sorry, when we have an ID update. If we have no ID, insert instead. So we want to add one more variable here. We'll put it right at the top. So this is why we've added that hidden input into our form. So when we're updating, this musician ID is included in the form, so we know which record to update. If we're adding, that's going to be null or empty. We won't have an ID until we insert. So we have an ID when we're updating, we have no ID when we're inserting. So we need the ID if we are updating an existing record. All our validation can stay the same. All the rules we've already added, those are all good for adding or updating. If we go to update and we take out the name, we want to see a message saying names required. So when we get down to this section, we now need to wrap this in an if statement. So what is that condition going to look like? If something else, something else. We're going to want to move this. What value can we check that will tell us if we're inserting or updating? Right, so we can use our empty function. So if musician ID is empty, are we going to insert or update? Insert or update? Right, we're going to insert because it's a new musician. We don't have an ID yet. So this code now goes in here. Otherwise, we now need to add our update command. We already have an ID, so we're editing an existing record. And we need to set each field one at a time, which is a bit of a pain. This part that I've highlighted in blue is super important. Why is it so important? Well, right, because we only want to update this one musician. What happens if we run the code, but we're missing that block of code in blue? Right, it will update all the musicians to have all the exact same values. Then we have a problem. I've done this before. I had a customer, they had an online bookstore, they sold educational books. They had about 600 books in their catalog. On one Friday afternoon at about 5 to 5, the phone rang and they said, "We've realized the price of this book is wrong. Can you please update it?" It was, I think, listed as $29.99, and they said it should actually be $19.99. The book is overpriced. People are asking, people are complaining the price is wrong because we've advertised it as $19.99. I was in a rush. I wanted to stop working. So I opened up my SQL editor and I wrote update books, set price equal to $19.99, execute. So I could get out of there. And the code ran. Let's just say that was a late night. So I updated the price of every book in the store, all 600 of them, to $19.99 because I was too busy to write a where clause. So then I had to call the hosting company and say, by the way, I need the backup from yesterday's database so I can pull out the table with all the pricing and overwrite the changes I just made because I was in too big of a hurry to make sure I put in a where clause. So you should always be, when you're deleting or updating, make sure you have a where clause. It is a big pain when you don't. I never did it again. I learned my lesson. Yes. Okay, so let's try this code out now, and we'll see what happens. So now I'll try this one again. I'm going to edit this one. I'll change the ranking to something much higher. So we'll see what happens when I try to save an update now. Okay. So now I get this error. Every one of you will get this error sometime this semester. Some of you probably have had it, seen it already. Invalid parameter number, the number of variables doesn't match the number of parameters. What the heck does this mean? There's a really simple, plain English explanation. This involves counting the number of colons. This is how to fix it. So it tried to run this SQL statement. How many parameters are here? Well, how many words start with a colon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many bind param statements do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hence the error. We're trying to run an SQL query with 7 parameter values, but we've only populated 6 of the 7. So it crashes. So whenever you get this error, I guarantee you every one of you is going to get this error this semester, at some point or another. The number of variables doesn't match. You just need to count how many colons in my SQL query and how many bind param statements do I have, because those numbers aren't going to be equal, and they need to be. So what would I need to do in order to fix this? If we've got 7 parameters here, but we're only filling 6 of them, which parameter in the update statement did we not provide a value to? Right, the ID, because in our insert, we only have 6. So insert works, because 6 parameters for inserting. So these 6 commands fill those 6 parameters, no problem. But our update statement, we've got this extra one. So now we need one more if statement. If we're updating, we need a 7th bind param command to fill the ID. So we'll say if not empty, in this case, so if our musician ID is not empty, we need a 7th bind param statement. So this command only runs when we have an ID. We don't want to bind a musician ID on the insert, because then we're going to get the same error. We'll have 7 bind param statements, but only 6 parameters in our SQL command. So it's going to generate that invalid number of tokens error again. So now this should work, I think. And once it works, the other thing we'll want to do is, instead of just saying saved, let's add our redirect, take the user back to the list as soon as we insert or update. So now that we've fixed that, I'll resend my update. It says saved. And now I got to do this. So I'm hoping this is going to update. This 50 should update to something else. So now it updated. So I could update other fields, make any changes I want. I can update one value, or I can update all of them. But we'll just update all the fields, whether the users change them or not. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, we're updating each column, because the user, like there's 6 fields on our form. We don't know which ones got changed. So the easiest thing is just update all the fields, even if they only change one value. Because otherwise we have to compare each value. Is the new value the same as the old one? And we'd have to write, so making this command would be impossible because we have so many combinations of what got changed and what didn't get changed. So the easiest thing is just update all the values. Yep. Right, the musician ID is a number. The ID will always be an integer. Right? Each column has its own data type. So name is a string, ranking is an integer, solo is a Boolean, right? For each bind param, we specify that one column's data type. Right, you got it. That's right. And lastly, I'm going to comment out this line and add so once we save, doesn't matter for inserting or updating, let's take the user back to the list right away. So if I do another edit, it just automatically redirects me back to the list now. And to make this a little easier to use, I'll maybe add a link on here to add a new musician. So that if I want to add, it will load the form. So on my musicians page up at the top here, maybe I'll put a heading and a link. So I'll just add in a couple of HTML tags. So I'll add a heading, and above our table, there's a link to add a new one. So I've added lines 10 and 11. So I get this heading. I can add something else here. So now it takes me back here. So now we can add, we can edit, we can delete, and we can update. Emily, I want to come back to the question you were asking because it's a good one about updating. Why update all of the columns? Maybe the user only changes one thing, right? So I change the ranking from 12 to 13. My update is still going to set the name from the Lumineers to the Lumineers. So because it's most efficient to just update all of the columns, occasionally you will get asked when you're updating, your client may say, I want to see exactly what things were changed in an update. And I can give you a couple of examples. So I had a client where their web application that we built, it was managing all of their equipment. And all of the equipment was very expensive and it was all insured. So their insurance company said, anytime you change something on the equipment, you need to file a report with us showing this was the old value and this is the new value, because it might affect the insurance cost of that piece of equipment. So on that form, whenever they would save, we would have to check, before we saved, we had to check one field at a time. What was the original value and what did the user put in the form? And if those values were different, we had to add that to a list and send an email to the customer to say this piece of equipment was updated and here were the things that were changed. I'm not sure I understand exactly your question. Sure.
So let's say, for example, I have like a table with like the name, and I have, for example, 21Pilot, and it's like okay, let's say 10, and it's in Toronto.
Yep.
So let's say now it's not 21Pilot, but it's like X. But if I put X and still 10 and it's still in Toronto, this is not going to be updated. This is going to be added because the IDs are the same, right?
Right.
So,
If you want to edit this one, you need to do an update with the ID.
oh, okay.
That's what we're doing here. That's what the update is doing. So when we have an ID, we are updating that row in the table. When we have no ID, we are going to add a new row to the table. So the ID, determining whether we have an ID or not, this is the determining factor telling us, are we updating something we already have, or are we adding something completely new? When we're updating, we have an ID. If we have no ID, then we're going to add something new instead. This is the idea. So we sort of have now the basic workings of a full web application. There are some other things we could do. Like we haven't, for example, added the ability to upload a photo or display a photo that we've uploaded. We'll do that a little bit later. Also, everything is public. So if I publish these files to AWS, which I could do, I'll connect quickly and just upload my files. So if I upload my files from today, forgot to upload my CSS and JavaScript. So my site is public, which means anybody that finds the URL, they can go here, they can add whatever they want, they could edit anything they want, or they can delete all the data if they want. Typically, most sites don't allow us to do this, that anybody who comes to the site can just modify any data any way they want. So one of the things we're going to do, and this will be what we'll do after Reading Week, is we need to start looking at security. how do we control who has access to the site? How do we let users sign up securely? And then force users, maybe somebody as an anonymous user, maybe they can view our musician list, but they're not going to be allowed to add, to edit, or to delete unless they register and log in to the site. So we'll want to look at how do we control who gets access and what are they allowed to do. So we'll do that in our next lesson. But that's not going to be for a while, not for 3 weeks. Then we'll also look at this piece about allowing users to actually upload the photos. We haven't really done anything with that yet. So we'll do both of those things in the next part of the course. The other thing we don't have is we don't have any kind of navigation. There's no header, there's no footer. We'll want to add those as well. So those are all the pieces we're going to add over our next few classes. Okay, it's 1:37. So I'm going to stop our stream. I will upload everything we've done so far today to GitHub. In order for you to practice edit and delete, there is a lab. Normally your labs are due on Monday. It's the holiday weekend. So I'll extend lab 2's due date until 5 o'clock on Wednesday. But it'll give you a chance to do some more practice with PHP before our exam next Thursday. So here's what you have to do. Just give me a second to make it visible. So in the assignments tab, here's the lab.